The factory is weird on hard mode, by which I mean it barely feels like hard mode. Aside from 3 rooms, the whole thing is kind of a breeze. Those 3 rooms, though. Anyway, the slingshot tutorial screens are basically the same with a couple of extra rocket launchers. None of them are homing rockets, so it's all pretty manageable. Ah, Blue Spikes, our old friend. We missed you in the city. Here's where I realized that the flying rocket bots cheat. They don't die when they hit spikes, unlike basically everything else. Hit the switch without even needing the slingshot, pro skills. Alright, here's the first brick wall. The intended solution is to carefully float across from the left wall. But I screwed that up and assumed that I had to try a different strategy. And after 36 more failed attempts, I finally managed to get past this room in a way that is quite clearly not what you're supposed to do. That safe spot between the spikes should not be there. Now, I certainly made that harder for myself than it needed to be, but that was still a pretty tough screen. This, meanwhile, is not. Look at this. After a killer first room, they barely add anything to the following screens. This is the weird thing about the factory, and I'm curious as all hell to find out how they designed the hard mode variations when there's difficulty fluctuations this extreme. That's not the button for the slingshot. Still not the button for the slingshot. This room looks pretty cool with the rocket launchers. For some reason it doesn't make it any harder though. This part here is exactly the same, which I'm actually thankful for, because having to redo this whole sequence because some extra enemy blindsided you would just be annoying. And then here the only difference is, I think the spike's on the underside of the block in the middle? It confuses me. It's been well established by this point that developers could and would be incredibly cruel, yet these screens offer basically nothing of any substantial challenge. The best reason I could come up with is that the rooms that are barely any different are puzzle rooms, and can take a while to solve on their own. Maybe the developers understood this and only wanted to make significant changes, or difficult changes, to the rooms that were really simple to get through, or wouldn't take too long to redo from the beginning. The problem is that they did some of the really simple puzzles as well as the more complicated ones. Like here, for instance. This room is really short, so why not put more than one extra chaser drone in? I like the addition of the blue spike here. I don't like the addition of the blue spike here. It's the same dick move as the dining halls. I guess it also confuses me because the chaser drones are really easy to get past in these rooms. After one lunge, they're typically out of range and the room is the exact same as normal mode. These screens take a little bit of setup to get past, but I still don't see why they couldn't have put a little more in. Ah, welcome to brick wall number 2. That rocket launcher was the real problem. Combined with these spikes and my own fair share of stupid mistakes, it took me 39 tries before I figured out what I needed to do. It can be really easy to jump too early and lead a rocket into you instead of around you. It's even easier to hit a spike while trying to avoid a rocket. And then we're right back to the really simple screens. At last, it starts getting interesting. Putting homing rockets into a room, without filling it with a bunch of annoying spikes, changes a lot about where you can safely go and how you need to go about moving objects around. I only wish they'd done this for more of the screens in the factory. The extra laser here doesn't make this room harder so much as it makes it longer. This is probably my favourite room of the hard mode factory. There's several things that the player needs to do to get the keybot to the door, but there's also homing rockets that they need to periodically dodge. Nearly everything you need to do can be accomplished from the ledge at the start, so as long as you take your time shooting the beam in between jumping over rockets, it's not a problem. What is a problem is that door. There's a slight lip on it that cuts off your jump if you're too close to it, and since you'll only be jumping when there's a rocket approaching... I still like it though. There aren't too many cases where you need to multitask like this, and it makes for some pretty rewarding gameplay. The third brick wall. This room can go right to hell. Until watching it back just now, I was convinced that the developers were setting an impossible task. With the platform needing to start moving from the left, it builds too much momentum and passes by the keybot before it's moved past the first two lasers, and I'd been certain that the dexterity of activating and cancelling the beam that you were being asked to display just wasn't possible with the way the physics work and the available positions you have to shoot the beam from. What I now realize is that the solution is probably to cancel the beam as you're firing a second beam at the wall, which would make the platform pause for just a moment, which would be long enough for the keybot to catch up. I still think it's a ridiculous thing to ask the player of out of nowhere, and I don't even know if that definitely works, but it's all I can come up with. At the time, however, after how long I'd spent trying and failing to get it to work, I concluded that this room was impossible and decided without regret to simplify it. And if you were wondering just how long I did spend in this room, the footage that you just watched was playing back at 700% speed. And, naturally, back to incredibly simple rooms. One measly rocket launcher almost feels a bit insulting at this point. Single chaser drone. I'm sure it would make this room a little harder since you're moving boxes around, but I wasn't in the mood for letting it survive long enough to find out. And that's the factory, weird difficulty curve and all. In total it took me 42 minutes, and as you saw, it was mostly smooth sailing with the exception of those 3 rooms.